Good morning. I'm Charles Kuralt, and this is Sunday Morning. Paying the piper is our cover story this morning. That is what President Clinton has said the time has come to do. The bills have been piling up for a long time now. Most people say they are in favor of settling the national debt, so long as the burden is shared in a fair way. All that's necessary now is a definition of fair. Depends who you ask. David Culhane will ask our elders.
Older Americans are reeling from skyrocketing medical costs and declining interest rates on their savings. They do want the federal deficit cut for their children and their grandchildren. But come with us to this retirement community in Florida and you will hear the protests against President Clinton's proposals to squeeze more from them in what they believe are unjust new Medicare premiums and taxes on their Social Security benefits.
Hope does not spring eternal. It's a kind of crop. It has to be tended. Bill Geist will introduce us this morning to a minister whose little patch of hope is in the ghetto. Upon this rock is his story. Harry Smith's story this morning we call Author.
The best-selling novel in America takes place in Iowa. It was written by an Iowa native who has been a basketball star, troubadour, and college professor. Robert Waller will tell us about the magic in the bridges of Madison County coming up on Sunday Morning.
What do we have to fear from Muslim extremism of the sort that may have caused the big bomb explosion in New York? I'll ask our old friend, Professor Fuad Ajami, later on. John Leonard has some thoughts on Salman Rushdie, the novelist who knows a thing or two about such extremism. It has put a price on his head. Charles Osgood will take us on a wonderful tour with dancers from Siberia. And Roger Welch has sent us another postcard from Nebraska. We'll have the sports, the weather, and a milepost after the headlines for Sunday morning, March 7th. The Washington Post says today that Supreme Court Justice Byron White is considering retiring. Justice White was appointed 31 years ago by President Kennedy. He's 75 years old now. He has been an opponent of abortion rights and affirmative action and usually votes with the conservative majority. The Armed Services have presented Defense Secretary Aspen a list of about 30 major military installations which might be closed. And the New York Times says 9 California bases are on the list, including El Toro Marine Air Station, McClellan Air Force Base, and the Treasure Island Naval Station. A Belgian airliner bound from Brussels to Tel Aviv made an emergency landing in Belgrade this morning after an anonymous phone call to the airline's offices in Tel Aviv said that terrorists and a bomb were aboard. No terrorists have been found, however, and no sign of a bomb so far. Here is something written by a 10th century poet of Japan. If only, when one heard that old age was coming, one could bolt the door, answer not at home, and refuse to meet him. We can't, of course, any more than we can bolt the door against the tax collector. In the past, however, having let the first visitor in, folks didn't have to worry so much about the second. Well, things have changed. Paying the piper is our cover story this morning. Reported now by David Culhane.
It is a vision of what many Americans want for their retirement years. Activity, companionship, financial security. But these pictures of a time of leisure are often deceptive. There is another side to the life of many older Americans. That other reality is worry about low interest rates on their savings, the threat of chronic illness, and soaring medical costs, all eating away at incomes fixed at relatively low levels. Dale Potter is a retired salesman from Grand Haven, Michigan.
We have people that are well-to-do, and we have people that have a very hard time. They're living on Social Security only, and they're really having it rough. So, and they're getting older.
And now there is another worry. The Clinton administration is talking about taxing them in ways many of them think are unfair. Increased Medicare premiums and new taxes on their Social Security benefits.
Right.
Sophia Bosco is from Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania.
I definitely believe we're being picked on. As far as the Medicare is concerned, there's a lot of people that can't pay that extra money up front. A lot of us don't.
Gerald Barnes used to run an auto dealership in New Stanton, Pennsylvania.
Most of the people in Sun City have worked hard all their life, and if they have a few extra dollars, why should they take 85% away from them?
President Clinton proposes to increase taxes on Social Security benefits. The share of benefits subject to taxation would go up from 50% to 85% over a certain annual income level, $25,000 for individuals and $32,000 for couples. In his address to Congress last month, the president said that the Social Security increases, along with other new taxes, are urgently needed to cut the federal deficit.
The plan does ask older Americans with higher incomes who do not rely solely on Social Security to get by to contribute more. This plan will not affect the 80% of Social Security recipients who do not pay taxes on Social Security now.
At this Sun City, Florida retirement community, ceramics is a popular activity. Harold Richardson worked for an insurance company in Indianapolis. President Clinton's Social Security tax increase is critically important to him now.
I've done a little figuring on it, and if my figures are correct, it's going to cost me about $111 a month.
So
From the 85 to from the 50 to the 85.
So, I mean, you're on a fixed income, right?
True.
Now, am I right in thinking that you watch every penny?
I try to. If I don't, the wife does.
How many different colors you use on that? Then about 5, isn't it?
Yeah, all up in here you'll have purples.
Larry Moss was once a professional baseball player. Now he's the president of the Ceramics Club at Sun City. I mean, are you safe? Is it going to hit you or not?
Borderline.
You're hovering right
Right.
at the level he's talking about.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, with the interest rate drops and everything, we've lost quite a bit of money, and we have to make it up someplace, and now they're talking about more taxes, and this is going to be a hardship for a period of time.
And I think that all of us will agree that
Democratic Senator David Pryor of Arkansas is a longtime supporter of Bill Clinton. Senator Pryor is also chairman of the Senate Committee on Aging, an expert on the problems of older people. Even so, he thinks the Social Security tax increase is necessary.
We've got to do something about deficit. We've got to do something about health care. Only a very small number of the elderly citizens across America are going to be affected by President Clinton's proposal at this time.
Hillary Clinton.
Senator Pryor thinks older Americans will be more accepting of the tax changes if the Clinton drive to reform the health care system gets results that offer greater financial security, especially in the area of long-term care.
And they do have great fears, they do have great worries, but the greatest of all the worries, I believe, is long-term health care and not having it, and what's going to happen to them and who is going to take care of them. And that's a concern that is demoralizing, and that's a concern that we've got to address, and we've got to do it now.
But there are those now who think the elderly are getting too large a share of federal benefits. Polls show that a growing number of young people think the elderly are selfish, greedy geezers.
A lot of these people do care. I mean, the greedy geezer image is just not accurate.
It's a stereotype. It's like a caricature, which I think does an injustice to most of the elderly.
Harold Shepard of the University of South Florida is a sociologist and former White House advisor who deals with the economics of aging.
So they're not a wealthy group.
That's right, over time. And we're talking particularly about the people 75 and over who are the fastest growing group in the whole country, and especially in Florida. We're not talking just about today's elderly. We're talking about, as one famous gerontologist put it, our future selves.
We're talking about all of us.
That's right.
Marge Clark is writing a family history for her children. She and her husband, Cornell, a retired psychologist, are not happy with the Clinton tax proposals. But, like so many people around the country, they will go along if the president makes more spending cuts.
He has a wonderful opportunity to straighten this country out if he has the guts to do it.
In other words, the mood of people is,
We'll support him. We'll support him.
He's got a groundswell of support, I think. And all he has to do is to have the guts to take Congress on.
And there is no question that they are ready to help cut the deficit.
We just keep, piling it up, and I probably won't see all of this, but our grandchildren will, and I really resent that. I really do.
It is a vision of what many Americans want for their retirement years.
They're trying to scrimp and to save just to make sort of ends meet, and then they see the threat of taking away a portion of all that they have, the only thing they have, which is a fixed income, and it really, truly creates a great deal of fear. But I don't think the elderly should have fear about this administration.
But that sense that people are having fun might be a little deceptive in the sense that there's some worry behind the fun.
There's a few more wrinkles in the brow, let's put it that way.
I've heard that from other people too, that, we've lived a life, we've paid our way all the way along the line, right?
Yes, and we deserve a little bit of fun and good time before we go on to another place.
It's Sunday morning on CBS, and here again is Charles Kuralt.
Time to hear from John Leonard. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Charles. In India, Hindus and Muslims are killing each other. In the Balkans, Christians and Muslims. In the Middle East, Jews and Muslims. None of this is Salman Rushdie's fault. They didn't need a novel excuse. It's been 4 years since the Ayatollah Khomeini put out a contract on the novelist Rushdie. Though Khomeini's dead, Iran says the fatwa cannot be revoked. Rushdie, the blasphemer, orbits the world with a price on his head, a rogue satellite beaming down messages to the occasional op-ed page. Almost secretly, He managed a while ago to publish a children's book. In Haroun and the Sea of Stories, Rushdie imagines a second moon, divided into day and night, where the children of light, called guppies, are custodians of stories, and their parliament is called a chatterbox, and instead of an army, they have a library, and instead of soldiers, pages. Whereas the children of darkness, chuppies, worship a tongueless idol and serve a prince of silence. On this moon, young Haroun learns that the world is full of things we haven't seen, but nevertheless believe in, like Africa, submarines, kangaroos. The past, did it happen? And the future, will it come? Consider me a page. After 4 years, why aren't we screaming bloody murder? I guess I'm not surprised at the silence of our religious leaders. Free speech has never been one of their transcendental categories. But our secular media, who wear the First Amendment like a bumper sticker or a prophylactic to every invasion of privacy in the lurid culture, have been just as shameful. With a man's life at stake, Esquire tells us that Rushdie's really an obnoxious crybaby, and the New Yorker attacks Esquire, and everybody else jumps on them both. Magazines posture in front of experience instead of engaging it. They look for an angle, a spin, or a take instead of a moral compass. They strike attitudes, like matches, in order to admire their own wise guy profiles. According to the wise guys, Rushdie isn't Socrates, or Galileo, or Thomas More, not even Spinoza, so don't sweat it. Well, Bill Clinton sweated it enough to declare for the writer against the assassins. This isn't going as far as the President of Ireland went. Mary Robinson actually met Rushdie. But it's farther than George Bush or John Major was willing to go. Rushdie also has his advocates at the American chapter of Penn. And the University of Nebraska has just published a book, The Rushdie Letters, in which writers like Gunter Grass, Margaret Atwood, Norman Mailer, and Tom Stoppard speak up. Listen to Nobel Prize winner Nadine Gordimer. The week of your dreadful anniversary, I am attending a conference of African writers from all over the continent, and I have just reminded them that what happened to you concerns us. For your novel is an innovative exploration of one of the most intense experiences we share, the individual personality in transition between two cultures brought together in that post-colonial world, whose arena is Europe and the Americas, as well as the territories they once invaded. Gordimer is reminding us that the Satanic Verses is about migration and metamorphosis. Rushdie himself is a child of imperialism, a mongrel self, he says, history's bastard. If the British hadn't colonized India, he'd never have been one of Midnight's children, partitioned 3 different ways. He'd never have gone to British schools, nor written, in English, his send-up of religion and myth and post-colonial identity crisis. We've all left home too often, for history or the movies, and lost ourselves in a world without borders, roots, or love. Stateless, we spin, hybrids, and mutants. For Rushdie, with a bounty on his head, there is no home. He's lost, spiraling in cyberspace, the ultimate hostage to sectarian fevers, communal violence, and bloody geopolitics. This Flying Dutchman astronaut should symbolize for all of us the dispossessed, everywhere, the damned and ghostly 20th century homeless. Boat people.
Author is what we call this next story. It is a particularly poignant story to me, let me tell you. More than 25 years ago, on the road in America, I did a story about the Wabash Cannonball, the passenger train that used to run through Indiana on its way to St. Louis. The camera crew and I had all the pictures and interviews we needed, but we didn't have the song. We needed somebody to sing the song for us. We stopped for the night at a Holiday Inn in Bloomington, Indiana, as I recall it. There were some young musicians entertaining in the bar that night, and during their break, I asked them if they knew the Wabash Cannonball. The leader was a nice young man named Bobby Waller. Sure, he said, that's in our repertoire. So we went out to the on-the-road bus and got the camera and lights, and when the story went on the air in the fall of 1967, it started this way.
ocean to the wide Pacific shore, from sunny California to icebound Labrador.
Bobby Waller sang the song for us. And about a week later, I got a phone call from Robert Kennedy's wife, Ethel. She said, Bobby's going to be campaigning through Indiana on a train. How can I get hold of that kid who sang the Wabash Cannonball? Well, I told her how to reach him, and a little later, sure enough, there, warming up the crowds from the back of the Kennedy train, there was Bob Waller again.
From sunny California to icebound Labrador. She's mighty tall and handsome, she don't fly well by all. A rugged combination called the Wabash Cannonball.
I got a note from Bobby Waller after that, telling me how much fun it had been on the Kennedy train. And over the years, I sort of kept up with him. I heard he had married and become a professor, later dean of the business school at the University of Northern Iowa. But I lost track of Bobby Waller 8 or 10 years ago until last month. I was in Europe. I picked up a copy of the International Herald Tribune, and there, plastered all over the back page, was a picture of Robert James Waller and a big story that said he had written a novel, The Bridges of Madison County. It was his first novel. It was also, the paper said, the #1 bestseller in the United States. So that's the first part of the story of my old guitar-playing acquaintance of 25 years ago. It's a wonderful story, I think. Harry Smith can tell you the rest.
A rider first loved.
Not far west and south of Des Moines, beautiful old covered bridges span the creeks and rivers of Madison County. The bridges are real. They're as real as Iowa.
Into Madison County, with the corn waving high. And he might have been wood smoke.
But a first novel by this man, Robert Waller, has folks all over the country convinced the people he's singing about, the main characters in his book, are real too.
That won't come again.
There are 400 letters up there right now that have just come in the last 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. You know?
What's the most common thing you hear?
Oh, there's a gamut of things. You've told my story. You've changed my life.
People believe the story is true.
Yeah, and there was no intent to deceive. You know, their novel is stamped on the cover. And it's actually an old literary device that I use, the found journal in the attic. That's a 19th century device that I sort of resurrected, I guess.
Robert Waller does take pictures, as does his main character, Robert Kincaid. In this bittersweet book, Kincaid, a National Geographic photographer, is assigned to photograph the bridges of Madison County. There he falls in love with Francesca Johnson, a farmer's wife. People are amazed when they find out the story is fiction.
People call me from major libraries. They're in the stacks. They can't find the photographs, and they're frustrated. The receptionist at National Geographic went out and bought a copy of the book because so many people were calling National Geographic saying, look up this guy. You know?
It was Robert Waller, the real person, who took these pictures of the bridges and was immediately overwhelmed by the idea for a novel.
I came home, threw my gear on the floor, turned the computer on. My wife was gone for 4 days to a pottery show, and I started writing. And from the first sentence, it was like the universe gave it to me.
When I got back on Monday night,
Robert Waller's wife, Georgia.
He said, I said, well, now, what have you been up to? And he said, oh, now, let me tell you. And then that was about all he said for the next few weeks till it was done, except, you know, he'd come down here once in a while, I might see him. He was living here, but he wasn't here. You know, it was like, and then he'd say, oh, and then he'd be crying, he'd be doing all this stuff, you know. But he
cried when he was writing?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, he cried.
What did you
Well, he would then say to me, oh, I'm writing this one part, and then he'd be crying. He couldn't even tell me what he was writing because he's crying.
It went on for day after day after day, 20 hours, 21 hours a day. And all I could think about was this. And 14 days later, I had the book finished, working almost constantly.
Suddenly, a man who had been a high school and college basketball star, had spent more than 20 years playing music in bars, was a tenured college professor, and dean of a university business school, was about to become a literary sensation.
That night I read it. I loved it. The next day I gave it to a colleague. She said, I agree, and we bought it.
Maureen Egan is the publisher who discovered The Bridges of Madison County. Give me more of what went through your mind as you read this thing that made you say, I have to have it.
First, it was a love story, which is always appealing. Secondly, he told it beautifully. But more importantly, as I was reading it, I was led through a variety of emotions. I got to know the people, I got to know where they lived, I got to know where they had come from, and I really cared about them.
Deep autumn was birthday time for Francesca, and cold rain swept against her frame house in the South Iowa countryside. She watched the rain, looked through it toward the hills along Middle River. This morning, her friends from Winterset had stopped by with a birthday cake. Francesca made coffee while the talk ran to grandchildren in the town, to Thanksgiving and what to get for Christmas for whom. They were good friends, though they would never understand what lay inside of her, would not understand even if she told them.
It's every middle-aged man's fantasy, and every middle-aged woman's fantasy, too.
Warren Cassell owns a bookstore called Just Books in Greenwich, Connecticut.
The unique thing about this book was when somebody came and bought the book, 3 days later they came back and bought 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 more copies to give away.
I'm curious, do you know how many of these you've sold?
Yeah, I've sold over 1,000 copies. And for a store this size, that's just it's phenomenal.
This love story set in rural America has sold more than 500,000 copies nationwide. And while The Bridges of Madison County is sometimes critical of small-town life, even in Winterset, yes, Winterset is a real place too, Bridges is a bestseller.
I thought maybe I should wear armor when I went down to a book signing in Madison County, but we sold 1,000 books there over the weekend. Farmers in their seed caps lined up buying the book, ministers buying the book.
I will speak from personal experience. I went to 3 large commercial bookstores last weekend.
Yes.
They can't keep it in the stores.
No, it's sold out all over the country.
Yet at the same time, critics from the Washington Post, from the LA Times, were anything but kind
That's
about
true.
it. How did it feel to...
I'm real used to hard criticism. And remember, I was a bar musician for 24 years, and one of my personal expressions is if they're not throwing beer bottles or shouting obscenities, you're doing okay.
She come down to Birmingham on the Wabash Cannonball one more, yeah. So I will listen to the jingle, hear the rumble and hear the roar, as she comes down the mountains, through the hills and by the shore.
The movie rights to The Bridges of Madison County were bought by Steven Spielberg. The current buzz in Hollywood is who will play Robert and Francesca. Waller's publisher has already purchased his next 3 books. You've never been uncomfortable, but what, I mean, there's cash flowing in over the transom, even as we speak. What is that like?
Sure, there's a lot of cash. Well, it isn't here yet, but I can see the trucks coming. Let's put it that way. They're good. They're getting within earshot.
We need a lot more slow dancing to radio songs.
What's it been like? It's been delightful, amazing, stunning, unexpected, but most of all, I think for a man my age, fun.
We need a lot more old cowboys out there on their own, and a woman to remember when they're scattered and blown.
Where would you expect to find an artist? In a bohemian enclave or in a welding shop? Well, there aren't any bohemian enclaves in Dannebrog. Roger Welch has sent us another postcard from Nebraska.
Within a few months of the time when I bought my farmland in Dannebrog, about 20 years ago, I came here to what used to be Bosch Welding in Cairo, not very far from Dannebrog. I bought myself a trailer and had some welding done on it, a new hitch, some reinforcement on the frame. I was an unregenerate hippie then, ponytail, feather behind my left ear, politically radical stickers all over my politically significant '69 Chevy van. How long did you have this place?
I owned it for 28 and a half years, and I worked in it before that as I grew up.
The owner of the shop then was Ed Bosch, a grizzled, tough blacksmith. His hair was, and still is, about 3/8 of an inch long. My tab for the trailer work that day was nearly $600. And I sent my kid up to get the billfold. He said, "Dad, your billfold in there." I said, "Well, then bring the checkbook." He said, "The checkbook's not there either, Dad." And I thought, oh boy, am I going to be able to tell this guy that I don't have a dime to pay him?
Yeah.
But it didn't matter. Ed Bosch said he'd trust me, even though he'd never seen me before, and probably didn't like much what he did see.
Out of the 28 and a half years that I owned that village blacksmith shop, I don't think I lost $1,200.
Ed Bosch is still in Cairo, still pounding away at metal, but in his garage now rather than at the shop. He's still pretty tough, and he's still a trusting soul. But he no longer repairs equipment for farmers or welds up trailers for hippies. He's our artist in residence. He's one of the hottest sellers at Dannebrog's Little Mermaid gift shop.
I can make one thing one day, turn around and make something different the next day. I don't make money at doing this. I make enough expenses to keep me in welding rod and gas and iron and things, but I'm satisfied.
It's not easy to miss Ed's influence around Cairo or Dannebrog, not in galleries, but on mailboxes, barn walls, housetops. Ed's project for last winter was this gigantic map of Nebraska, a gift to his hometown of Cairo. It's decorated completely in iron. That way it'll last as long as Ed. I like the idea of people like Ed, working all their lives with their hands, learning skills and tricks, wrestling with the complex interactions of heat and metal, not spending much time thinking about the finer things, and then retiring to another life in which they use all they know to move in another direction, art. What are you making today, Ed?
Well, I'm making an ornament to go on top of a mailbox.
Do you wind up making things that people want or that you feel like making?
Well, I do what I feel like 90% of the time, but if somebody calls up, I make it. I do a lot of donation work for the village and for different people, for different organizations.
The skyline seen on the lumberyard is one of his donations to the town he's lived in all his 68 years.
When I donated that deal on top of the lumberyard for a logo for the village, one man says, "What did you get for that?" And I said, "Nothing, that was a donation." He says, "Well, you're a damn fool." Next young man come along, he says, "You're too old to be climbing up there putting that up." So I says, "Do you know any young ones that'll help me?" I'm starting to put the mileage from all over the world on a sign to put up down by the restaurant.
Okay, Ed Bosch may not know all the things about art history and theory and design that they teach in the universities and academies. But on the other hand, neither will they ever know all Ed Bosch knows about the almost magical relationships between iron, heat, and pressure. Ed, where's the sign going to go?
at Tony's Cafe in Carroll.
I don't suppose many galleries will be putting together Ed Bosch exhibits. But then I don't suppose Ed spends a lot of energy worrying about it either.
Get plenty of places from around the world.
He has his customers and his admirers, and besides, Ed Bosch works mostly to speak to his muse, who I guess must be Vulcan.
It's Sunday morning on CBS, and here again is Charles Kuralt.
In Siberia, there are forests, wolves, vast stretches of tundra, and also, it turns out, some of the best dancers in all of Russia. And now, as Charles Osgood is about to tell us, some of the best dancers from over there are over here.
The Krasnoyarsk Siberian Dance Company is dancing its way across America. We caught up with them in the heartland, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. They are heading west toward California and finally Arizona at the end of March. It is a rough trip, close to 60 performances, mostly in small cities like New Bedford, Massachusetts, Hershey, Pennsylvania, Tahlequah, Oklahoma. They began with 70 performers, but 4 dancers and an accordion player left the troupe for good, doing a 2-day engagement in Canada.
One Pepsi small.
The dancers save their money and live on fast food. They spend endless hours on the buses. Coming from Siberia, the bleakness of a Midwestern winter can be just like home. Nevertheless, halfway through the tour, they are homesick.
My family, Chernovtsi, Западная Украина. My family in Krasnoyarsk. Wife, 2 daughters. 1 daughters. Очень скучаем.
We miss our families very much. We get letters from home. My daughter and wife both miss me. Your heart aches.
Сердце болит.
Section 3, that'll be to your right.
When they opened in Brooklyn, New York 2 months ago, critics praised them for a wonderful mix of folk dance, ballet, and modern dance. The Times said they were the most fascinating and provocative national ensemble seen in years. They begin at a higher energy level than other dance groups, and they never come down.
Американский зритель – это потрясающий зритель.
The American audience is just incredible, and we give our all to them. This short work is called In the Chicken Yard. It is a modern comic ballet. The music could be Broadway. But all of these works came out of the head of Mikhail Godenko, who never saw a Broadway show or much modern dance. Godenko died 3 years ago, just when Krasnoyarsk was opening up. The baton has been passed to Arkady Kondakov. On this tour, each night, he must restage the performance to suit the theater, which can be little more than a college gym. But the dollars generated on this tour are vital. Sure, it's difficult in the U.S., but our range of travel has become much more limited. The 15 Soviet republics have closed their doors to us. Eastern Europe doesn't want us. And in Russia itself, transportation and hotels are too expensive. We survive only on support from the state and earnings in the West. There will be happy memories to take back to Siberia. At Northern Iowa State University, they held a class for local dance students. After about 15 minutes, they had turned Northern Iowans into budding Siberians. Later, there was a pizza party for the Russians, and it was the Americans' turn to entertain with clog dancing. There was even a performance of the Russian folk classic, Kalinka. But most of all, there was friendship. Friendship with Americans, something that just a few years ago would have gotten these Russians in trouble. In so much trouble that they might have been sent to, well, Siberia.
Well, the bookshelf seems to have attracted our attention this morning. We took you to meet a best-selling novelist a little while ago. Now, Bill Geist introduces us to the subject of a best-selling book. Upon This Rock, the book is called. Its subtitle is Miracles of a Black Church. So, come meet a miracle worker in a place in need of miracles.
I just need a word from the Lord.
This is St. Paul's Baptist Church in East New York. Reverend Johnny Ray Youngblood presides over nearly 3,000 worshipers every Sunday morning. But this is the East New York we normally see on the local news when someone is shot, or in the movies when a handy backdrop of devastation is needed. Death Wish 3 was filmed here. And so we tend to write off such a neighborhood as a fathomless sea of universal despair.
American Church has been the epicenter for the African American community. It has been the economic center, the political center, the educational arena, the social arena, the religious arena. It has been the extended family. It was what African Americans had. I want us to pray together.
Reverend Youngblood arrived to a place that seemed pretty much God-forsaken some 19 years ago. But he has brought resurrection to this neighborhood. You ever think when you got in the ministry you were going to become a housing developer?
No, I didn't. No, I didn't.
Reverend Youngblood believes in bricks and mortar Christianity. Banding together with other Brooklyn congregations, the church has participated in building 2,300 private homes.
It gives you a lot of hope in terms of the people when you can just give them a boxed house and then their genius, their creativity goes into effect.
He found neighborhood storefronts housing drug dealers, so he bought the stores and rented them to legitimate businesses. He demanded more police protection in the neighborhood and raised a little hell, if you will, with supermarkets selling inferior products at superior prices. He found the public schools failing, so he built his own. But how can a church afford to do all this? A church in a poverty area.
People are very sacrificial when they can see where their monies are going. One of the things that I do in terms of our communities is I look at it from another angle. If drugs can be sold in our community, and if liquor stores can prosper in our communities, and if all kinds of restaurants can prosper in our communities, then that's telling me that there is money in our communities. I want to talk, if at all possible, about the redemption of relationships.
And there are so many more now to give. When Reverend Youngblood arrived, there were 84 members. Now there are 5,000.
Because Jesus is coming by East New York and he's looking for new leaders. Jesus wants to know who is it that will follow him to make this world the place that it ought to be.
They respond to his unorthodox vision of what he calls the church unusual.
People are drawn because there is definitely a sense of hope here, because we are engaged in living out our faith.
800 members tithe, giving 10% of their incomes.
And I just make sure that they can see where their finances are going, and that way they don't mind giving.
Author Sam Friedman spent 3.5 years documenting what he calls the miracles of St. Paul's.
There's a famous line of scripture that says that faith is the substance of things unseen, but that as I got to know this church, I felt more and more strongly that what was remarkable is that faith here had these very tangible ways of being seen, palpable ways. Look at that house. Listen to that group of recovering drug addicts. Go into the school.
100, and she's an honor roll student with an average of 93.
Reverend Youngblood underscores the importance of education by reading the students' report cards from the pulpit.
And he only has 6 A's.
I don't personally know if I would have appreciated that when I was a kid.
One of the reasons I do it is we operate from an African proverb that says it takes a whole village to raise a child. So whatever you do, know that God is in charge.
The church is still in the business of saving souls, of course. Souls like Frederick Douglass, who's in a program at the church for those with drug and alcohol problems.
If it wasn't for the inspiration that I get from people in this community, I think I'll be back trying to sell drugs, because I needed somebody to uplift my spirit. You know, and today I get this from these people, this unconditional love. I mean, genuine love.
Mr. Douglass, who now works in a law office, wants to become a role model for his 2 sons.
This is a touchy area for me because both of them are in jail. I could only be an example of the power, you know, for them, you know. And for them seeing me change my life from being a, you know, big drug dealer or being a derelict, then to become this, I think it will make an impact in their life.
But I need you men to get it done, and I promise you, you will not be sorry. I promise you, as your pastor.
A major priority of Reverend Youngblood's is attracting men back to the church and to their families.
Because the return of the African American male will mean a reduction in everything that is talked about now. Crime, homelessness, absentee fathers, absent students. That is my hope for the future, that the return of the African American male will really be somehow or another the salvation of this entire nation.
It ought to be embarrassing to the government that a church of the working poor can do so many of the things of which government has shown itself wildly incapable.
Author Samuel Friedman.
That there is an incredible ethos of self-help that's alive in the black community, that there are sturdy institutions that are in place, and that there are leaders who are real leaders, not leaders because they end up with the sound bites or the headlines, but leaders whose work speaks for them.
Don't quite buy the sea of despair.
I can't afford to buy the sea of despair. Despair is in the eye of the beholder, just as beauty is. Possibility is in the eye of the beholder. The despair is not as thick as it's played up to be. Media talks about despair. Government talks about despair. We are dispensers of hope.
At this time of year, you can walk for miles down the wild beaches of the North Carolina Outer Banks without meeting another living soul. We'll leave you this morning alone on Hatteras Island with the coots and ducks and herons and sandpipers, and the sun coming up, and the tide coming in. I'm Charles Kuralt. I hope you'll join us here again next Sunday morning.
She's a rugged combination called the Wabash Cannonball. Hey, we'll listen to the jingle, hear the rumble, hear the roar, as she glides along the woodline, through the hills and by the shore. Hear the mighty rush of engine, hear the lonesome hobo's call. We're riding along in safety on the Wabash Cannonball. She come down to Birmingham one cold December day. As she rolled into the station, yeah, I could hear all the people say, there's a train from Indiana, boy, she's long and she's tall. And she come down to Birmingham on the Wabash Cannonball. One more, yeah. So I will listen to the jingle, hear the rumble and hear the roar, as she comes down the mountains, through the hills and by the shore. Hear the mighty rush of engine, hear the lonesome hobo's call. They were racing through the jungle on the Wabash Cannonball.